Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week so we can learn how to make money, the millions that we deserve, right? During this crisis that's coming, that's happening literally before our eyes. Let's go ahead and get started. The central bank is making our lives absolutely miserable, right? They just raised the interest rates again this week, which was the biggest piece of news. We have a situation, if you guys didn't see the previous video, because you all should be seeing the videos every week, right? So what's happening is that we live in an over-financialized society. Let's call it that, right? What happens is during the crisis in 2008 and 2009, which some of you may not be old enough to remember or live through, the system literally almost collapsed. And so most of the developed countries around the world lowered the interest rates to the point that they were the lowest in recorded history. So what did that happen? That caused a boom in everything from stocks to real estate. Everything just exploded, and we're literally living in the bubbles of bubbles. When I was in high school, for example, some years ago, I turned 26 again this year. We never knew even the name of the director of the central bank. I forget the exact title name, but you guys know what I mean. And now it's like a household name. Everybody knows who Powell is, right? And so what's happened is since 2008 and 2009, since we live in this over-financialized economy, everybody's literally exploded the amount of debt that they have because it's just easier to finance. Because if the interest rates are lower, you can finance more and you can move more property, let's say, or buy more stocks, borrow money to buy stocks also. And then it just becomes just absolutely gargantuan. And that's literally what we're living through. So because of that, any small change in the interest rates literally affects what happened to the economy because we're literally just over financialized, right? Everybody has, everybody has a loan for everything, basically. So that's basically the problem. And since they're continuing to raise the rates, that's causing the dollar to increase in value. And that's causing big trouble overseas because a lot of countries that don't have let's call it a par with the dollar, like the euro, which is 1-to-1, or the pound, which is, 110 or 115-to-1, for example, it's more valuable than the dollar. Their debt increases fivefold, tenfold. And that's, for example, what's happened to Colombia. Colombia this year, what year are we in? Yeah, 2022. It's literally at the beginning of the year, we were at maybe 3,600, 3,800. And now since the elections of the president, it's literally gone up to 5,100. It's almost doubled in value, right? And so that's basically the situation that we're living through. And that's why it's so sensitive that the interest rates in the United States keep going up. On top of that, we have a lot of other countries that are raising their interest rates as well. Europe, New Zealand, the UK, absolutely everybody. So it's literally putting the brakes on the economy, and then everything else is becoming frozen. Real estate or construction, for example, which is about 17% of the economy in the US, people can't afford to buy houses anymore because the interest rates are so high. So the house that would have cost you maybe $1,500 to buy a month, paying your mortgage, now is $2,500 or $2,700. So that's why the situation with the interest rates is so serious. Due to that, expectations went down. The stock markets in the United States and also Canada went down as well. Let me know if you guys like those explanations, because it's one thing to just kind of report the percentages and the numbers, but it's another thing that kind of understand what's going on to be able to prepare yourself for what's coming. And even though I have a lot of negative news, I do want to remind you that during the Great Depression, it was the best time in the history of the world, to become a millionaire. So the opportunities are going to be there. You just have to find them. And that's precisely why I do these videos for you guys. The euro, overseas market news, including the European markets, mostly positive. Europe, India, and London. And did I say India? Italy and London were the most positive of all. In Latin America, most of the stocks there were positive as well. Africa and the Middle East, they were mixed, with Saudi Arabia being the only country, the stock market that went down in the region. And if you guys didn't know, they were planning, I can't remember the exact number, but if you guys saw in the news, they're literally planning a city that's literally in a straight line in the desert, which cost $1 bajillion trillion. And they literally have already started building that city, which is, I thought, something that was really interesting. In the far, far east, Asia and Australia mixed as well. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong went up over 8%, and the Shanghai, the market there in China, went up over 5%, most positive of all. Bitcoin and crypto news. I honestly didn't have a chance to get all the news. There wasn't a lot of news this week with crypto, but the markets were up. Bitcoin was up 3.16% at 20,738, and most of the other markets were positive as well. Doge had a big, I got my thing here of Doge, don't I? There it is. That was the Shiba button, not the Doge button. I gotta add my Doge button on here. But Doge had a huge increase after Elon Musk bought Twitter, and he's in a little bit of trouble as well with Twitter. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Commodities, weaker than expected factory activity data from China, and the COVID curbs that are starting to come off. That has helped oil explode. The U.S. crude went up over 5% to 92.61, while Brent went up almost 3% to 98.57. If you guys didn't know, China has what's called a zero COVID policy. So if one person they find that has COVID, they literally shut down the entire city of millions of people because they just don't want it to spread. So they're talking about removing some of those curbs or not having that strict zero COVID policy. Like, we live in the United States. If you get it, you'll be fine. So that allowed both U.S. crude and Brent to increase quite a bit. The oil majors, which are companies like Exxon, Chevron, BP, Shell, Total, which is the biggest one in France, combined a $50 billion in profit in quarter three. Now, one of the things I wanted to explain here is look at how the government creates the problem and then they provide the solution, which is not in the benefit of any of us. They have printed more than 40% of the dollars in circulation after COVID, meaning the amount of dollars in existence, because they could just, they could just flip the switch and inject more dollars into the economy, right? 40% of the money didn't exist before the pandemic. So they literally have printed more than 40% of the money, and that's why we're seeing all the inflation. Well, if inflation goes up, that means that the value of the dollar is continuing to go down, even though relative to other currencies, it's still going up. The actual purchasing power is going down, meaning that a $5 coffee today, maybe next year, will cost $6, right? So because of that, a lot of the commodities that are based in dollars will continue to go up, meaning, for example, oil. So because of that situation, mainly this week, because of the news in China, oil has skyrocketed, right? Well, these oil companies now are making $1 bajillion every quarter, and now the government is like, you're making too much money. We got to tax those extra profits. So you see, they literally created the problem with inflation, right? Because they literally created it. And then they're literally just going to tax us more. And, every time they put on a new tax, they're just not going to take it off, which is normally how it works. Gold purchases by central banks reached a record during quarter three as well at nearly 400 tons. Turkey, Uzbekistan, which is between Russia, I believe, and, let's call it the Middle East, just to the right of the Middle East. I can't remember the one on the south. I believe it's India or Turkey. But anyway, Turkey, Uzbekistan, and Qatar are the biggest known buyers. There are a lot of people that are anonymous. For example, China, which is the biggest producer of gold in the world, doesn't export it. So they probably have a lot more gold. And remember what I always told you guys, don't pay attention to what they say, pay attention to what they do. And the end game of all this inflation, I think, is we're going to have such a problem. We're going to have literally probably a depression. But it's going to be so bad that people are going to be suffering so bad. The government's going to be like, hey, you want to use this government coin, the central bank digital currency? It's going to be great. And everybody's going to say, yeah, let's use it. And that's when we're going to have full-blown communism in the whole world. It's going to be awesome. 300% jump from a year ago, reported by the World Gold Council. And year to date, central banks bought 673 tons, which is more than 1967. Gold went up by over 2% to $1,683. Silver went up by over 8% to $20.95. Financial and banking news on Monday, the Eurozone recorded record inflation since the Euro started at 10.7% for October. The Reserve Bank of Australia went up by 25 basis points, which is 0.25%. And South Korea's consumer price index went up by 5.7%, which is higher than what they expected as well. So the whole world is literally just going up in flames with the inflation. The Fed, as I mentioned, they decided if you guys don't know, the Fed is the central bank in the U.S. They decided to raise rates by 75 basis points, which is 0.75, in an effort to slow down inflation. And obviously, with the explanation that I gave you in the beginning of the video, with we're just living in this financialized economy. That's why it's such a bad effect, because we're just in a super bubble of interest rates, essentially. Turkey's annual interest rate went to a 24-year high to over 85%. Can you imagine that? 85% for 1 month to the next, or 1 year to the next. What's 85 divided by 12? It's like what, 10%? Higher than that. No, less than 10%, like 7, 8%. Can you imagine? You go to get a coffee, it's $5. Next month, it's $5.50. The following month, it's $6. The following month, it's like $6.70. Can you imagine? I think that's probably what we're going to walk into soon. Turkey's annual, I mentioned that, over 85%, 24-year high for the inflation in Turkey. So I hope you don't mind repeating it. In political news, Netanyahu won Israel's prime minister. Remember, he's the not embattled prime minister, but he's a little bit, let's say, I forget the word in English. I always do these videos in Spanish first, and I always forget the English words. Let's just say he doesn't have a good reputation with everybody. I'll think of the word here in a second. Brazil had presidential elections. They voted a communist from the left that was in jail over the right-leaning Bolsonaro. In economic news, the UK economy is on a cusp of a recession as households and businesses wrestle with rising energy costs, jump in borrowing costs, and also volatile financial markets. That has to do with them raising their interest rates as well. The manufacturing in the UK had its biggest contraction since the pandemic in May 2020. So everything's slowing down. Labor Department on Friday added 261,000 jobs in October. The unemployment rate went up to 3.7%, and the participation rate is 62.2%. Remember that the participation rate, meaning that the people that are participating in the labor force, doesn't include the people that stopped looking for a job. Labor market is also showing signs of pressure with the higher prices and stubborn inflation, including the rising interest rates and the weakening global economy. Corporate news, BYD, the company that stands for Build Your Dreams, which is the biggest electric car maker in the world, beat Tesla in the world's largest car maker, or car market, I should say, which is China. Their profit went up by 350% due to a range of products and strong sales. They beat Tesla in that market. Tesla also notified everybody that they were going to start shipping their new Tesla semis, which Pepsi put in their first order for those. Meta Platforms continues its carnage. It went down over 6% after their horrible Q3 financial results. Uber shares rose 11% despite having a net loss of $1.2 billion. I don't think that Uber's ever made money, ever. There was $512 million attributed to a change in the equity investments, of the valuation of those investments, which means they still lost over $500 million. And I don't understand how they're still making, how they living. And now in this economy, people are going to just continue to give them money if they're just going to burn through it, right? Revenue was up 72% year over year. And Tuesday, Japan, their shares went down after they reported a 25% drop in the Q2 operating profit. Twitter temporarily closed its office and cut workers' access to internal systems on Friday after letting them know in an email that they're going to cut the workforce by 50%. They're currently losing $4 million a day. Elon Musk has quite a problem on its hands now that a lot of the protesters, let's call them, are pressuring a lot of companies to stop advertising on Twitter. So Pfizer, GM, among others. So now his revenue is literally going to go almost to zero. So we'll see how he solves that. One of the things he did announce was that if you want a little blue check verified thing on Twitter, you can just pay $8 a month. And obviously the people who only had the blue checks aren't too happy about that. Trade news, Russia for a moment halted their cooperation with the grain shipments. If you guys remember, Ukraine and Russia are some of the biggest exporters in the world of food and grain in particular. Once the war started, Russia did a blockade of all of the grain coming out of Ukraine. And then there was a deal in between the UN and Russia and Turkey and everybody. So they said that they were going to stop it because of the escalation in the war. And now they're coming back to be able to continue allow the exports. In technology, nearly $2 billion has been spent on virtual land in the last 12 months. People and firms are racing to get a foothold in the metaverse. And investment news, the world's second largest economy, which is China, saw its factory activity unexpectedly fall in October. Obviously, this has to do with that zero COVID policy, but luckily they're looking like they're gonna cut back on that. North Korea sent 30 missiles on and around the sea in South Korea and Japan. They sent 4 ballistic missiles into the sea, while the U.S. sent 2 supersonic bombers over South Korea. So it looks like that's escalating a little bit as well. Unfortunately, we have seems like all these wars are starting in these rumors of wars, right? Ever since new president took over. An unusual facts, according to this is actually really interesting. According to an international study, scientists discovered reservoir 3 times the size of all the oceans beneath the Earth's surface be in the inner part of the Earth between the upper and lower mantle. I thought that was really interesting. All those conspiracy theories about those people living in the Earth. Dun, 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 dun. And a hoard of nearly 1,000-year-old Viking silver was found after they were taking down a Viking cabin, which had wood that was rotten all over the place. Coins and rings and all kinds of stuff. That was actually pretty interesting. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. And remember, the preppers were right.